Good morning, Sunday. It's October 20th, 7:06 in the morning. How you doing? Coming up on the weather mic, we'll have your forecast through next weekend. We still have a low stuck over the Four Corners. A lot of flooding yesterday in eastern New Mexico, a lot of flooding today in eastern New Mexico, and a better chance of tornadoes. Then that storm kicks into the plains. We'll show you where the severe weather will go. We have a cool off for the Great Lakes in the east coming. And what about our Halloween snowstorm? We'll talk about that too. All coming up next on the weather mic. Let's check out the hazards for today. Eastern New Mexico, look out. Flood watches, flood warnings. Lots of heavy rain yesterday, flooding in Roswell, New Mexico, and other places. Meanwhile, in Arizona, we're looking at a freeze warning still, and still heavy snow in the southwestern mountains of Colorado, with winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories here. Up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, there's a little bit of fog to deal with this morning, so you got low beams on your way to church this morning. All right, the weather spotlight takes us back to Albuquerque. Second day in a row, our low hasn't moved, so our risk here for heavy rain is still there and severe weather. So 57% chance of thunderstorms in Roswell today and some severe. And your chance of severe weather goes up, or chance of rain with some severe goes up as you head north. Santa Rosa to Roy to Clayton, over 75% Tucumcari, U2. So another round of severe weather here, some tornadoes too, and also some very heavy rainfall with flooding. In fact, our severe risk is now a slight risk, so increased over yesterday for eastern New Mexico, and then around that a marginal risk which gets into far west Texas and parts of Colorado, even the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma. And our tornado risk is here, and it's up to a 5% now. So again, a greater risk of tornadoes in this area. Now, if you were watching Storm Runner Media like I was yesterday, they did chase a storm that had a wall cloud. May have produced a tornado, but nothing that we saw on camera. But it was just a beautiful storm and hail covering the road. So looking for a repeat performance today with actually a better chance of tornadoes. So be watching for that. Surface for today, our low is still in the Four Corners. We still have that risk of flooding and severe weather. Eastern New Mexico, still snow. Colorado, Utah, the mountains of Arizona, where they've seen some snow above 7,000 feet, say. Meanwhile, another storm moving into the Pacific Northwest. That is going to kick our low that's been stuck over the Four Corners into the plains. And a chance of rain for Florida. Hurricane Oscar lurking out there and moving towards Cuba, but not a threat to the United States at this time. Temperatures today, these are your much above and much below average temperatures, much above northern plains into the upper Midwest, much below still northern Arizona, Utah, basically the Four Corners, and where it's raining in eastern New Mexico, West Texas. Slightly below average for the southeast and a little bit above average for pretty much everyone else. That translates to these kinds of highs, 80s today in Iowa. Man, into Nebraska, even Kansas. Lots of 70s in the plains, 70s in the Ohio Valley, even into the southeast, 70s all the way up the east coast pretty much. So just warm, 80s back in Texas. Then it's cool around the low, with 40s and 50s in the Four Corners for the most part. And then you head back into the west, warms up a little bit. California, some 80s, 70s for Oregon and Washington, except for elevation. Lows tomorrow morning. Nothing really too cold here, just a lot of 40s. Now, the southeast is refreshingly cool tomorrow morning. 40s all the way down to almost the Gulf Coast, 50s for sure. So very pleasant, and 40s all the way up the coast too. Not a lot of 30s on this map except for the Rockies and into the west, 40s and 50s for the Northwest, and even a lot of 50s for California, even into southern Arizona. All right, your 24-hour precipitation amounts, very copious for New Mexico. Could be 2 inches plus for northeastern New Mexico. Now, again, this is on top of yesterday's flooding rains. So flooding risk is there for eastern New Mexico for sure. Some of this will fall as snow in the mountains of Colorado into Utah and Arizona, otherwise rain at the lower elevations, lighter amounts. And our next system for the Pacific Northwest could see up to an inch, a little more for the Cascades of Oregon, or the foothills there at least, and even more as you get up into Washington state. Surface for tomorrow. Our low moving into the plains with a chance of scattered storms. Texas all the way up to South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri. So that'll be nice. Our next cold front moving into the Great Lakes with a few rain showers around that. Tropical storm Oscar hitting Cuba right now, spreading some rain into Florida. And then our next storm for the Pacific Northwest, rain and snow there, which will kick our low into the plains with our severe weather threat for tomorrow for Kansas, Oklahoma, into Texas. And then it's just a marginal risk, but a risk. And then general thunderstorms in the light green around that. And then the tornado risk is there too, 2% for Kansas, Oklahoma, parts of Texas. For tomorrow, your temperatures cool off a little bit in the plains with that low and those storms. But further to the north, it is hot. I mean, for this time of year, this is pretty warm. Hot, I was going to say, but, averages, in the low 60s or cooler for Minnesota. So 30 degrees above, I mean, you're looking at still 80s, but still 80s. 80s for Iowa, too. So very warm in the plains out ahead of the storm. So here are those temperatures: 80s, Iowa, Minnesota, 70s, Missouri, Kansas, 80s, Oklahoma into Texas. So really warm here. Louisiana, Mississippi, some 80s. Transitioning to 70s for much of the southeast, although 80s in Florida. And then all the way up the coast, we got 70s, even for New England. So warm temperatures. For the Northwest, that's where it's coolest with that next low moving in. A lot of 50s and 60s here. I should say 40s and 50s. Near 60, 61 Eugene. Surface on Tuesday. Our plains low is kind of falling apart. It's kind of fizzling out, but we have another shot of cool air heading for the Great Lakes, and so that's moving into the northern plains. So some general light rain showers around that for the northern plains, upper Midwest, into the Great Lakes. Tropical storm Oscar moving near the Bahamas, and some rain along the Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina coasts with that. And you see some snow up there in the Northwest. Temperatures on Tuesday cooling off, Pacific Northwest, northern plains. Still very warm for the plains and into the Great Lakes, and even the Northeast on the warm side, slightly above average, Southeast and Southwest. Those highs look like this. A lot of 80s in the Southeast into Texas and Florida, 70s as you get into the mid-Atlantic, northward, 70s for the Midwest, Ohio Valley, Michigan into the plains. Some 60s, though, even 50s for North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, and the Northwest cooling off with a lot of 50s and some 40s here, but still 94 for a high for Phoenix on Tuesday. All right, taking a look at our GFS model this morning. We'll take you through Halloween. So we see our low spinning here in the four corners. We see our next system moving into the Pacific Northwest. As this moves in, there's not going to be room for this low to hang out, so it'll have to get kicked into the plains, and that's what will happen. But sitting and spinning and raining today in eastern New Mexico, west Texas. This already gets us into early morning Monday, and we're already starting to see the low move into the plains. We're starting to see some pretty good rains for Oregon, moving into Idaho and Montana. Meanwhile, our next risk for severe weather here on Monday, and we're starting to see that happen in Kansas, into Oklahoma, back towards Texas. A little bit of light rain for Iowa, but man, it's going to be on the light side. We need a lot more than that. Further to the north, some showers up here, northern plains, Minnesota. As our low skedaddles in Canada, we do see some colder air spilling in behind it. This is going to move mostly eastward, not so much southward. It will cool us off here in Iowa, so we're looking forward to that, and some cooler air moving into the plains. But mostly this is for you, Great Lakes, and further to the east. We see that cold front forming. This is Wednesday night. So some showers, Pennsylvania, New York State, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine. As we get into Thursday morning here, pretty quiet otherwise, so a nice cool off for you in the Northeast and Great Lakes, but it warms right back up most of the country as we get towards next weekend. This is Friday, pretty quiet, some light showers in the Northwest, and then we head into Saturday next weekend. We see some warm temperatures, windy or breezy conditions for the plains. Excuse me, and then another storm moving into the Pacific Northwest. This is why when we take a look at our 6 to 10 day temperatures, it's going to be coolest up here in the Northwest because we're seeing some systems, mostly glancing blows for the Northwest, but a little bit of rain, that's time of year. So we're getting into Monday here, the 28th. See some showers in the Southeast, Pacific Northwest, most active. And Oscar, don't worry about it too much, Florida. Right now, Oscar is staying well to the south. All right, we have more rain for the Pacific Northwest. This gets us into the 29th now, as that system's a pretty strong one off the Oregon coast. As we get into the 30th, and we're watching the Rockies into the plains for Halloween. That's what the last few runs of the GFS have shown us, and for Halloween. And it's happening here, but it's delayed and not as strong. But we do see this is midnight Halloween, so Halloween pretty much over, and we're seeing some rain and snow, Utah into Wyoming. And so is our Halloween snowstorm for the Dakotas a bust? Well, according to this run, it is. So again, we'll keep you posted, but as we get into early November, a strong storm for the Pacific Northwest, and the rest of the country fairly quiet. So we'll see if we get more active as we get into November. I do believe that we will, as we're seeing even a stronger storm off the Pacific Northwest by November 5th. And so as we get more troughs and ridges, that should bring more active weather across the United States into November. I mean, it can't be much less quiet than it's been for October. So the rest of October, this is the 25th through the 29th, warm temperatures countrywide except up there in northwestern Washington, and that's where we see our best chance for precipitation too, maybe southern Florida a little bit on the wet side. Going through our anomalous temperatures through the week. This is Wednesday, so this is your cool off for the Great Lakes, but still warm for the plains, especially southern plains, even into New England ahead of the front. The west is slightly above average. As we get into Thursday, that cool off spreads from the Great Lakes into the northeast, reaching down as far as the mid-Atlantic. Everyone else on the warm side. Southern plains warming back up, northern plains. Even more warmth for the northwest and the west. Friday, a little bit cooler for the northwest with our next system, but very warm. South Dakota into the upper plains, even the mid and southern plains, central and southern plains. There we go, above average. A little bit below average there for the Carolinas. And then Saturday, next weekend, much above average. Iowa, Missouri, Kansas. Just very warm temperatures for next weekend. Not quite as hot for Sunday, but everybody above average. I would say much above average for the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, even into Ohio. So it looks like our very warm temperatures continue as we head through the next week, with a few exceptions, especially Pacific Northwest. And the big deal today is going to be the flooding in eastern New Mexico and a pretty good chance of tornadoes there. So tune in Storm Runner Media as they chase the storms. I'll probably be in the chat too, hanging out. Otherwise, we'll catch you tomorrow morning right here on the Weather Mic.